I'm Penelope Walton Rogers, and I'm speaking to you from the Anglo-Saxon laboratory in York. We have been commissioned by Aberdeenshire Council to bring to publication one particularly exciting element of the St Nicholas excavations, which is the evidence of the organic remains. So in this video, I'm going to be giving a preview of our investigation and a foretaste of the material we should be publishing if all goes to plan in 2021. Those of you who have been following the work of Alison Cameron and her excavation team will know that the present-day St Nicholas Kirk stands above a sequence of earlier churches, the earliest of which dates to before the mid-12th century. Now, there have been other excavations of Scottish churches which show a similar sequence, but what makes St Nicholas stand out from the others is the extraordinary preservation of organic remains. By organic, I mean all those materials which decay rapidly if left in open ground or half buried in soil. In this particular instance, that means textiles, leather and wood. The survival of this evidence is important for two reasons. First of all, organic materials contain carbon, which means that they can be radiocarbon dated, and we currently have a rolling programme of samples being tested in Souark at the University of Glasgow. The second and more obvious point is that organic materials tell us what the bodies looked like when they were placed in the grave. Now, most of the remains are small fragments of the sort shown here. There are two complete hats which I'll be showing you later on, but mostly they are this sort of size. But it doesn't matter that they're small because we can apply a whole battery of scientific tests to establish the nature of the textile. A number of specialists have been drawn into this work for chromatography of dyes, microscopy of fibres, EDXRF of metal threads, and mass spectrometry of leather, and so on. So we have now a complete inventory of all the remains from this site. But we don't stop there. As archaeologists, we're always trying to establish what these fabrics meant in the past and how they were used. For decades now, we've been collecting information on what sorts of sites certain fabric types are found. Are they urban or rural, high status or artisan? And if they're from graves, what age and gender are they found with? And so by this means, we can build up a picture of individual fabric types and work out how they were regarded at the time of their use. With this in mind, let's start by looking at some of the textiles from the earliest graves. This folded pad of cloth comes from the group of graves that predate the 12th century church. And there are at least 5 adult male bodies buried in dense folds of this very coarse fabric. In fact, it looks as if it's woven from string, doesn't it? If I put my forefinger next to it, you can see just how coarse it is, 2 or 3 threads to a centimetre. This is medieval sackcloth. We know this because it's been found in numerous sites, mostly in ports, at quaysides and warehouses all across northern Europe. Now, unlike modern sacking, medieval sackcloth was made of animal hair. This one is likely to be cattle hair, although there are other examples of goat hair and coarse mountain wool. And the other place in which this sackcloth is recorded archaeologically is in monastic burials. And here we're able to match up the archaeology with the historical records, because it's known that medieval monks were often buried in a hair cloth, known by the Latin term colicium. Because colicium was a lowly fabric, it became associated in the medieval mind with poverty, abstinence, penance. We talk about sackcloth and ashes, don't we? And thereby piety. So there's an awful lot riding on this simple fabric. As far as the St Nicholas site is concerned, this tells us that this group of men buried in Collicio were almost certainly monks. And it suggests that, like many other mother churches, St Nicholas had its origin in a monastic house. So you can see that the organic evidence is already giving us valuable information about the site. Now, frustratingly, there is a gap between this pre-12th century evidence and the 16th and 17th century graves. Skeletons have been recovered from the intervening period, and their graves include small metal shroud pins, but the shroud itself has not survived. And this is almost certainly because it was made of linen, and linen is a plant fibre which does not survive well in the kind of acidic environment that we have at St Nicholas. But the photograph here is of a skeleton in a most post-medieval grave, from which small patches of textiles and leather of particular interest have been recovered. This fragment on the left is from the abdominal region of the body that I've just shown you. It's been embroidered in metal thread and silk on a fine worsted fabric. Worsted means it's made from combed wool. And it's been dyed red. And it was only part of a complex which was lifted whole and x-rayed before it was unfolded by the conservators. As you can see, the embroidered motif is a flower in what looks to me Jacobean style. Now, this was an adult male body, and it could perhaps have been from an embroidered waistcoat, though I suspect it more likely that it came from an embroidered chasuble, in which case this was probably a priest. This man had also been buried wearing shoes, although they had survived only as small fragments of the sort illustrated here. Analysis has shown that the shoes had been made from leather derived from sheepskin for the uppers and cattle hide for the soles. Cattle hide leather is thick and hard-wearing, but sheepskin makes for a fine and supple leather, and certainly not the sort of thing you would expect an artisan to wear, for example. So, although we don't know the style of the shoe, the raw materials suggest that they were of the same general status level as the embroidered garment. For the last of my selection, here's a whole hat of the skullcap style. It is made from 6 segments of red silk satin, and it has been trimmed with woven bands worked in silver thread. It was found on the skull of a man, an adult male, and it had been pulled forward across the upper part of the face so it hid the eyes. Here is the same hat viewed from the inside. Those loose threads look to be the remains of stitching, probably for a linen internal lining which has decayed in the way that the medieval shrouds have decayed. The grey sheen behind the woven bands is caused by corrosion from the silver threads. It is one of 4 such caps from St Nicholas, of which 3 are illustrated here. The one you've just been looking at is top left. 2 are complete and 2 are fragmentary. They're all slightly different in construction, and there are variations in the raw material, but they're all essentially the same style of red silk skullcap with silver and silver gilt bands. They resemble a cardinal's skullcap, and I suspect they represent burials of dignitaries of the church. But it's been difficult to find other early examples. So far I've only found one in a 16th century hat from a church in Germany, so this just emphasises what exceptional finds these are. So this has been just a selection of some of the highlights from this extraordinary site, and there's more to come. There are some pieces of lace that I suspect represent a hairnet, more fragments of shoes, some rather mysterious wooden objects, and silk ribbon bows from 18th and 19th century graves. The scientific work on the collection is now complete, and once the radiocarbon dates have been finished, we'll be moving forward into the phase of interpretation, where we put the evidence into its historical context. It will then be published as a standalone volume on the organic evidence from the site. So if you want to follow this up, watch this space. Before I finish, I'd like to say an especial thank you to Alison Cameron, who led the excavation and who initiated this project, and to Bruce Mann and Aberdeenshire Council for recognising the need for funding for the full range of scientific work. Finally, I'd like to thank the members of the project team who contributed all their work on time and with immense professionalism. So Thank you all.